Today we're going to talk about multiplying and dividing by powers of 10. One of the important things to remember is when we multiply whole numbers, they are always going to become larger. And when we divide whole numbers, they are going to become smaller. So multiplying is always going to make our numbers larger, and dividing is going to make our numbers smaller. That's a good way to check our work as we move forward. Because our number is based on 10, when we multiply by a power of 10, we're simply going to move the decimal. Some examples of powers of 10 are 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, and also 1,000,000, which I'm not going to write down right this minute. When you multiply by a power of 10, we are simply going to move the decimal backward the exact same numbers of zeros that the number displays. We'll look at some examples. So again, when we're multiplying, we're moving the decimal backward. Here's some examples. If I have 100 times 45, okay, I have 2 zeros in my power of 10. So I know my decimal needs to be moved backwards 2 places. 45 starts off like this. We talked about in class, the decimal is invisible, but it belongs right there. So to move it back 2 spaces, I'm going to move it backwards 1, 2. My new decimal belongs right there. Empty spaces are the same thing as zeros, so I would fill in a 0 for each empty space. And my new answer would make that 4,500. For the next one, again, I'm going to count up the number of zeros so I know how many places to move the decimal. There are 1, 2, 3 zeros. So I know I want to move the decimal 3 places. I'm going to transfer my number, which is 56, and again write down where the invisible decimal point is. Because I want to move it backwards 3 spaces, I'm going to draw 3 jumps. 1, 2, 3, my new decimal belongs right there. Because I have 3 empty spaces, I will then add 3 zeros, which makes my final answer 56,000. One of the things that we talked about in class was, why are we moving the 0 backwards? Well, if you look up here, you can see that when I move the 0 backwards, I'm multiplying, and that's making my answer bigger. I started off with a 45, I ended up with 4,500. When I multiply, I move the decimal backwards, which essentially makes the number larger. That's a good check you can do. When you get done, if you know you multiplied, check to make sure that your answer is actually larger than the number you started off with. Likewise, when you divide by a power of 10, you'll be moving the decimal place forward by the number of zeros. This sign right here we talked about in class is actually a division sign. So here we have 34 divided by 10. So again, I'm going to place my decimal point there so I know where to move it. And because there's 1 0, I would move my decimal point forward 1 place, which places it right there. So I end up with 3 4/10. And if I do my check, I start off with division and end up with a number that is smaller than I started off with. When we divide numbers, they become smaller. In this case, there are 1, 2 zeros. So when I write my number, 356, and place my decimal, I want to move the decimal point back 1, 2 spaces, which makes my new answer 3 and 56 hundredths. And again, we also talked about why we move the decimal forward. We move the decimal forward because we're dividing, and it makes our original number smaller. We know when we divide numbers up, they become smaller. Exponents are the small numbers to the right, left of a number. They indicate the number of zeros in a power of 10. This helps us understand how many places to move the decimal. For example, here, I already know I can look at the exponent and move it 2 spaces. So because I'm multiplying, I know I want to move the decimal backwards, 2 spaces. So in this case, 1, 2. I know that I have to fill in those empty spaces with zeros. In this case, I end up with 3,400. For this one, once again, I already know the exponent has an exponent of 3, which would be equivalent to 1,000. There's 3 zeros in 1,000. This is already telling me I have to move it 3 spaces. Because I'm dividing, though, I want to be careful that I move my decimal forward, because again, I want to make the number smaller. So my decimal starts there, and I'm going to move it forward 3 spaces. 1, 2, 3. Have a 0 for the empty space, and I end up with an answer of 65 thousandths. These are some of the examples that we did in class. Okay, I'll go over a couple of them. There's a couple that we didn't do just now. Number 2, the decimal is already there for me to work with. And again, it has an exponent, so it tells me how many places to move the decimal. Because it's multiplication, I'm moving the decimal backward. And again, 2 spaces. So 1, 2. It's important for the children to draw the jumps because this helps them record their thinking and their thoughts on paper. Put a space in for the, or a 0 in for the empty space, and you should get an answer of 450. And that was today's lesson.